Welcome back to the Pin Podcast. I'm your host, PinUp Miami, and I have a fellow Cuban American friend with me, and she is South Florida's brightest artist, and an honor to be her friend. She's also had her artwork digitally shown at the Louvre in Paris, France, and she was also asked by the Smithsonian American Latino Museum to feature her artwork. And I have to say, she's also a fellow Gator like myself. And it's funny because I have a piece of Vivian's artwork before I even became friends with her. She had her art featured. It was a gator with a guayabera, which is a Cuban type of shirt. And I thought it was super cute. It had a cigar, if I remember correctly. And it was like the cover work for an invitational dinner for an alumni association. And it was called Guayabera Guateque. And now she's my friend. So isn't that awesome? Her name is Vivian Estaleja. I always called her Estrella because she's a star in my eyes. And if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, you'll be able to see a couple images that I'm going to put of her artwork up. And if not, you could follow her on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Arteluna Miami. And her website, if you want to buy some of it, at artelunamiami.com. So, Vivian, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. She is my first guest of this podcast and the first of many. And I wanted to know, before we start talking about being Cuban American and all, is what inspired your art? Or what inspired you to start painting?
I always loved art since I was little. I was one of those kids that, I guess I was the weird child. I don't know. But I never played with toys. I never played with, dolls or anything. They kind of freaked me out. And I always wanted to have, just a coloring book or some paper and do something artsy. And then later on, when I was about to turn 15, the very Latin tradition of the quinceañera, my mom and my aunt gave me the choice of having a quinceañera party with the big ball gown and the whole thing, or traveling. So I was like, I'm not the quinceañera kind of girl. I guess I am now that I'm older, but at the time I wasn't. And so I chose a trip, and my aunt took me to Mexico. As soon as we landed in Mexico, I just fell in love with all the colors. Mexican culture is very bright and vibrant, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do and try to capture that in my artwork.
Oh, nice. So you can definitely see that in your artwork. It's funny. I didn't mention it to you before, but I also did not have a quinceañera. I went to a Miami Heat game. I have a twin sister, if you didn't know, and we didn't really want a quinceañera, and I'm sure my parents were really happy that all we wanted was to go to a Heat game with really good seats.
Yeah, quinceañera's a huge production and very expensive, I'm sure. So,
and they surprised us with a limo. So I guess they were happy that we didn't want to throw down a big party or anything for two people. Can you imagine?
And I see as adults, I think I picture both of us like the big gown.
Yeah, now I want a big gown.
But
if I ever get married, I want a big ass gown, and I want it to flow. Oof. How times change, right?
I know.
So today's topic is being Cuban American. So for those that don't know what Cuban American is being born in America to Cuban parents.
That's right. How simple, right? But it means so much.
It means so much more than just that definition. So growing up, my first language was Spanish. I was born in Hialeah, if you're familiar with South Florida. And I literally thought that South Florida was what the world was like. So growing up, I thought everyone spoke Spanish. I learned English at school, so it was Spanglish. Then I would speak more English with my friends. So I slowly started speaking more and more English. So I really felt like that was the norm until you leave South Florida and you realize it's not. And then you just get confused. It's like puberty for your nationality, I guess.
That's a great way to describe it.
What would you say growing up, Vivian?
Well, I had a similar experience where, my parents are very Cuban. And so that's what I thought it was, Cuban. Even though growing up, actually, my mom tried to instill in my sister and I that we were American because we were born in the United States. But we were raised as Cuban. So that's what I have always felt. I'm Cuban. There's no distinction to me that I live here or that I've actually never been to Cuba, but I still feel very Cuban, But then when I went away to college, I went to UF, like you mentioned, and it was a different world.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you get on that turnpike and you get out of the bubble that's Miami, it's like you feel a change in the air, and it's different. And that's where I encountered, what the quote unquote true American is, I guess it was white America. And it was very different to how I felt. But thankfully at UF, there were a lot of student organizations, and I kind of found my own people, while at the same time, being able to learn, you find yourself, you become prouder, I guess, of who you are and those traditions that you grew up with. But you do learn that there's a world outside of the Miami bubble.
It's definitely a Miami bubble. I had the same experience at UF. It was my parents wanted me to stay home as long as I could, go to community college, which is not a bad thing, I'm not saying, but I really wanted to get out, at least for me, because I was a twin. I shared a bedroom with my sister all the time. So my intentions was just to get my own room. But once I made it to UF, I was either told I'm not American or I was not Spanish, because also I had confusion from people that were born like in Cuba that would say, oh, you're not Cuban. And then I'm like, bro, I'm not trying to say that I'm 100% Cuban, but I was raised this way. Like, I have lechon for Christmas. Like, I feel
have lechon all the time.
I feel like we could get together, but it's always that thing that you don't belong, or which you felt too. And I also joined the Hispanic Student Association at UF. I actually became president of the Hispanic Student Association at UF, which also made me learn, college was really interesting for me because I got to learn who I wanted to be. It was actually how I got into PinUp after college. And then the process of coming back home to finally stay back in South Florida after experiencing this cultural awakening, I guess you would say, or what I called it before, I forgot. But puberty awakening for your culture is when you get back, you really, like you say, you appreciate your culture more. And look at that, I talk with my hands like it's...
We can't help it.
There you go. But when you get back home, you realize, you are American and you are Cuban, and you're trying to find the best of both worlds. And I think as time has passed, do you also feel like you're realizing that more people appreciate that more in Miami? And because when I still travel other places, I still feel like I don't belong, if that makes sense.
Well, I love to travel. Any chance I get to leave our bubble, like I said, I do. And I've been lucky that I've been able to travel around the world, and there's always questions. I was in Norway recently, and they were asking me like, "Oh, you're from the United States?" Like, it didn't click in their minds that I'm American, so they just had questions. I guess we're not the norm, but it's our normal. You
just reminded me of something. When I went, so my mom's side has a family in Spain, and I went to visit them, and, it's a shock because I guess in America, it seems to be the mainstream. But they kept talking to me in English and then translating everything in Spanish because they thought I don't speak Spanish because I'm American. And then when I would tell them I'm Cuban American, my cousins would be like, no, you're American. And I'm like, no, you're Spaniard Cuban because your dad is Cuban. And they're like, no, my dad is Spaniard. And it's like other places don't, from my experience, my cousins don't appreciate their own heritage. And that's the first time I realized I'm proud of being both, because you're just plain old Spanish. I guess you don't appreciate your other side with your dad. And I asked him, and he completely changed to be more Spaniard. So I guess it's also how you're raised. I don't know. It was interesting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when you get away from it, and you're away from home, and you're, in another city or in another country, it makes you realize, how proud you actually are of what you are,
Yeah.
I remember growing up, I used to hear a lot, like, ustedes no son ni de aquí ni de allá. Telling my sister and I that we weren't from here, but we weren't from there either. And it brings a lot of nostalgia, but it's also a little bit bittersweet, because it's true. We're not from here. We're not from there. We're trying to fit a mold. But we're equally proud of our Cuban heritage as we are of the American. And I'm sorry I get emotional, but it just brings up a lot of memories.
Yeah, it's something that is not talked about, but people feel that way. Like when I brought up this subject for you, you understood exactly what I meant because I thought nobody else felt this way. Because I'd see other Cuban Americans that are more comfortable with just being more Hispanic than American, but I want to be both because that's what I am. Our parents both raised us that we're American, but we're different than the norm.
Right.
So I understand.
We are American. What does it mean to be American? Everyone in America is from somewhere else. Or
That's true.
The roots are from somewhere else. So how much more American can we actually be?
We're the real Americans.
We're the real deal. And I think it's something that, most immigrant groups, whether from Mexico or, anywhere, Irish Americans, they could probably relate to the same because they probably encountered the same from their cultural groups as well.
Do you think location matters? If somebody that was born to Cuban parents in Idaho, do you think it would be different than us?
Absolutely. And the reason why I say that is because is Miami Middle America? No, it's not. We have our own melting pot here. Miami is so multicultural, and there's any type of food you want you can find. I mean, we just we were so lucky to grow up in a city where you have that experience and you can encounter different cultures and just different ethnicities. So if you go to white bread Middle America, and you have Cuban parents or you have parents from another country, you may be able to relate. We may be able to relate to that on a lot of levels, but I think it's also very different because, like we mentioned before, Miami is a bubble. We have all, it's like our own little culture, here.
I also think what's the word I'm looking for? Not landscapey, but it's also how we are sourced. We're like near the Caribbean, but there's no other borders around us, so nothing else could mix in. So we're literally enclosed in our bubble. Like it's a legit bubble. It's a legit bubble.
We have that tropical flair, the palm trees, yes. And everything.
Key West. We got the Florida man.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think Florida man, that Florida man word that all the crazy criminals are from Florida. I think that's middle and North Florida. I know, it's South Florida too.
I don't know. We're kind of crazy down here too. On a different level.
How would you say that you've adapted, now that we're older or more mature or more aware? How would you say you adapted to this? Or, how do you adapt it to being Cuban American? I mean, do you think I think I just accepted it, just.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that I had to adapt to. I accepted it since I was very young. I'm Cuban. That's just how I identify, So,
do you feel that okay, I know you have nieces and nephews, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel they because now they are two parents that are American. Okay, so two Cuban American parents. So this child is also considered Cuban American? I would say yes, because the same traditions are being instilled from their mom and dad on. So do you think being Cuban American will disappear after a certain time, if that makes sense?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so.
Because I've always thought about that. For example, my boyfriend now, his mom is Hispanic, his dad is Irish, but he's more Irish than Hispanic. So I'm sure if we got married and if we had kids, my kids would be different than if you had kids, because you're probably, if a person had two Hispanic parents, it gets a little you start losing your traditions. But then I guess it goes back into the melting pot of what Miami is, a mix of everything, no?
Right.
Just food for thought.
I don't know. My sister and I were both raised the same way, and we both feel very Cuban, and we're very ingrained in our traditions. In the morning we have café con leche and Cuban bread, and my niece and nephew are being raised that way. My nephew's favorite thing are croquetas.
Croquetas.
And they moved to Virginia a couple of years ago, and that's not a very Latin area at all.
Oh, that's
but
true.
they still, that's what they ask for, the Cuban bread and the Cuban crackers and things like that. So I think, it depends on the upbringing. Like, that's how we were raised, and so that's how she's continuing those traditions with them. So yeah, I don't know.
What would you say are some... we're going to be like Mythbusters right now. What are some Cuban American stereotypes that you want to break or that you're annoyed of?
Ooh, okay. Let's see. There's lots of Cuban American stereotypes. One of the ones that really annoys me is that we're not Cuban.
Yep.
It drives me nuts.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Where, yes, was not born in Cuba, but it's just logistics. And I've never been to Cuba, but I still feel that so fiercely in my soul that I am Cuban. So that's probably one of them.
Yeah,
it's
agree.
Just semantics, I guess.
I feel Cuban, even though a lot of people will disagree. I'm sure people will say I'm not Cuban or that we're both not Cuban because we've never been to Cuba. But I mean, are we American? We haven't been all over the U.S. I'm just saying. We are American because we're mixed from somewhere else, which is what every other person here is.
I was at an event a few months ago, and Vanessa Garcia was there. She's a Cuban American writer. She wrote the play The Amparo Experience. It's been very popular in the last couple
I've been
years.
wanting to. Is that the one that has the Bacardi mix?
Yes.
Okay.
That talks about the Cuban Revolution and all of that. And she was there. She was speaking, and she referred to herself as an ABC, an American-born Cuban. And when she said that, it was like the light bulb moment, for me. And I was like, wow, that's what I am, an American-born Cuban. Because I was born in the United States. Technically, yes, I am American. But I feel so Cuban. It's just my culture, So that just was one of my awakenings. And I'm in my 40s. So, you're always learning and evolving. And that was just a light bulb moment for me.
So what would you say... have you ever gotten any legit hate about being Cuban American?
Not so much hate, but you hear a lot of comments. At one point, Miami was predominantly Cuban, I guess. And so a lot of other ethnic groups that have come in after the Cuban exiles, there's always little comments, that you hear here and there, and they're kind of annoying sometimes. But I guess, we might do the same.
For me, I feel worse if somebody were to say something that's Cuban. If somebody Cuban, straight off, from Cuba, born in Cuba, when they say something like, bro, you're just American, you're just American, you're not Cuban.
Or you don't understand.
Kind of you don't understand, you weren't raised in Cuba.
Yeah.
I feel like, what? Oh, my dad.
Or I hear a lot from even friends that are, were born in Cuba and had a different experience to mine. All these Cuban Americans or Cuban Americans feel this way or Cuban. And I'm like, wait, don't generalize because that's not me.
Yeah. That's the most important thing. People are putting everyone in their bubbles when everyone is just a mix, which is, again, what you perfectly said. America is made off a mix.
Yeah.
We're the best mixtape.
Absolutely. It makes it spicier, more colorful.
Yes, some sazon.
But I hear a lot also our generation of Cuban Americans is very privileged, and in a way we may be, but I feel like our parents that came to this country with nothing worked so hard to give us a better life that, and I get emotional again. I'm just a crybaby.
It's okay. These are emotional subjects. It's literally what goes on in our heads. This topic I've thought about, and I thought I was crazy for thinking that I don't fit in either world until I started realizing, or I verbally spoke it out. And it's...
Yeah, but, our parents left their homeland with nothing. A lot of them very young themselves. And that's what they were searching for. They were searching for freedom and to give us a better life and things that they weren't able to have. So that made us a little bit privileged because maybe, they worked so hard for that. And we may very well be. I think we are in many ways, but I also think our generation's doing a lot to improve the world and do better for
yeah. My parents, they're both Cuban, but they didn't meet in Cuba.
Neither did mine.
Oh, where did they meet?
My parents met in New York. Yeah.
Oh, what a mix.
When they were in their 20s.
My parents met in Spain. My mom left because she had family in Spain. My dad left because he was like a young kid that was against the government. So they kicked him out and they sent him to ship them out to Spain. And my parents met each other at a food bank because they were both poor. And they got married in Spain. And they had family in Texas. And then they went to Mexico and crossed the border. And then they went to Florida. So it was like a whole trip for them. And then me and my sister were born in Florida, in Hialeah.
Yeah, my parents got married in New York and then came down to Miami. And I was born in Hialeah.
I love the stories of how people came to America because, you know, like, for example, my parents, I didn't go into detail, but can you imagine having to plan out, you meet somebody, and then you plan to go to the U.S. and you have to go through Mexico, and then you got to go from Texas to Miami, and I don't know. And then I love hearing other people's stories because it's like like you said, they work really hard to get, you know, my dad was fighting the government there, and he wanted something better for him and for even better for his children, and you know, so for us, yes, like you said, we are kind of privileged but that's because they pushed us to be here. And then we're trying to make things better now. So it's like a ripple effect that we should always try to be better and better. So yeah, pretty interesting.
Do you find that do your parents talk a lot about their experience leaving Cuba?
No.
Yeah, mine don't either. Especially my mom.
That's why I don't know the details.
She was 16, and I know they went through a hard time to leave the country, and she doesn't talk about it.
But it's funny is that they don't talk about bad stuff, but they'll talk about all the good times.
Yeah.
When I was little, oh my God, we used to get this fish, and this fish was the size, because my dad's nickname is El Tiburón, because one day he got this fish and he was little, and everyone thought that he said it was a shark, but it was actually a little fish, and so from there on, they just called him El Tiburón.
Oh.
And when I was little, they used to call me La Tiburoncita. And that's why I like sharks.
But yeah, my dad left Cuba when he was 10 years old, so he was, you know, still very young. He was a child. But when he says stories and, you know, retells, I grew up listening to it, he'll tell you like the street that he lived on. He remembers the name. He remembers, you know, the places that he went to. They're
appreciative.
It's like that nostalgia that just takes you back to a different place. I think that's part of the reason why I love the retro, you know, vibe so much and all things vintage is because I just grew up listening to all these stories about a different time. And so it kind of takes you back to that feeling.
I love nostalgia.
Oh.
Well, that's why, you know, you're here with me. We got the vintage flair in this modern life. Hi, Vivian. It's so nice to talk about this.
It is.
Is there anything else that you want to express to the pinned podcasters?
Well, I think this is a great space to talk about different things, different topics, and this one in particular hits home because it's kind of the story of our life, you know, and how we feel, and it's just important to us.
Well, I am so thankful that Vivian is my first podcast guest, and thank you so much. It really means so much to me that you all are listening. Vivian is a part of this, and
happy to be here.
I want to thank you. And we'll be back next week. And make sure to follow me on Instagram at pinupmiami.com to hear the Pinup Miami or my website, misspinupmiami.com. And you'll be able to catch up on any old episodes. I'll be on Spotify, iTunes, and make sure to share. And if you want to be part of the podcast, you could call the number down below. And as you can see, it's an awesome number, 833-4A-PINUP.
Ooh, that's catchy.
833-4-PINUP. You can also leave a voicemail and we will play it on the air. if you want to do a shout out. Oh, we should do dedication love hour like Power 96.
Now that's a very Miami reference.
If you get that reference, let me know. Or you could watch us on YouTube and you'll also see our beautiful faces and Vivian's artwork. And thank you so much, Vivian. And again, Vivian at artelunamiami.com. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.